despite the fact that I just said in my last video about the C100 that I don't actually do any vlogging with the C100s, I use my GH4 for that, I decided, you know what, I'm going to use my C100 this time. I'm not 100% sure I'm in focus, and it's really difficult to tell if I'm even framed up right. I'm using my computer monitor over here to do framing because the C100 doesn't have a flip out screen that I can kind of look at for framing or focus peaking. So I'm guessing at it a little bit here. So this is kind of a test run. I want to talk about computers though, and the Mac. I'm a Mac user. I currently have two machines that I run most of the time, my 2017 15-inch MacBook Pro and my late 2012 Mac Mini, which is a quad-core i7, 16 gigs of RAM, and a 480 gigabyte SSD, plus a whole bunch of external hard drives that I use. That Mac Mini is my main editing machine that I run Premiere Pro off of, and also it acts as a file server for me as well. The thing is, it's getting a little old. It runs Premiere Pro still generally fine, but I'm looking for something with a little more boost, a little more performance these days, something with a dedicated GPU. And that's part of the reason I bought my 2017 MacBook Pro, was so that I could get something with a dedicated GPU while still getting a quad-core i7 and 16 gigs of RAM and so on, that I could use for editing, except I've never actually really used it for editing. I tend to just use it as my daily driver for just everyday web browsing and things like that. It's really kind of overkill, the machine that I have for what I do with it. It's one of those things where you buy it thinking, oh, I'll use it for this much more powerful task, and then you just never end up using it. And I probably would have been better served with getting like a 13-inch MacBook Pro or even a MacBook Air, for that matter. Probably a 13-inch MacBook Pro, and using that instead. But I really wanted that dedicated GPU, so I ended up spending almost twice as much to get it, and I really haven't gotten any use out of it. So there's always the potential I could in the future, of course, but I tend to like having a desktop as my editing platform because of all the hard drives I have to hook up to it. And so that's sort of just, it was my Mac Mini before getting my MacBook Pro, and it's just kind of continued to be my Mac Mini. But over the last few years, in fact, even before I got the MacBook Pro, I've been mulling over the idea of getting a PC, and a more powerful editing PC. And actually, when I went out to get my MacBook Pro, I went out looking for a PC laptop, thinking I was going to make that transition then. And I did. I bought a Lenovo Yoga machine that I liked the specs on, and the price was good, but then I had a screen issue with it, and I got freaked out, and I was like, what's going to happen if I need tech support? What do I do? Where do I take it? You know, and I just, having used consistently my old late 2008 MacBook for the last 7 years, and having taken that into one of my local Apple stores when I had an issue with it, getting it resolved within a couple days, I kind of went back on that thinking and thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to take this Lenovo back. And then I went out and spent nearly twice as much to get a 15-inch MacBook Pro with similar specs, although not entirely the same. And yeah, that's how I ended up with the MacBook Pro, knowing that I could take it into an Apple store, one of the two Apple stores around me, if I had an issue with it, which 2 years later I did. I had the battery swelled on it, and I had to take it in, and even though it was out of warranty, they fixed it free of charge. 3 weeks later, I had my machine back to me, good as new. And so that's kind of part of what you pay the extra Apple tax for, is to have that kind of service and support. And I was kind of happy I did it, and I do like my MacBook Pro. It was a little pricey, and I haven't really taken full advantage of that hardware on it because I've just been using it as a laptop for web browsing and documents and some Photoshop edits and things like that, not really what I kind of bought the extra power for. So now I'm thinking, maybe I'd buy a new Mac as an editing machine, maybe a new Mac Mini, or maybe even an iMac. Well, a new Mac Mini, you can hook up an external GPU to it. But the new Mac Minis also run a little more expensive, and they're not as upgradable as the 2012. So when you figure all of that in, like an external GPU and everything, you're basically at the cost of an iMac anyway. So it's like, well, how about an iMac? Because I need a new screen anyway. And if you were to go buy a 5K monitor, that's pretty pricey by itself. So maybe I just buy an iMac. Good plan, except that there's rumors Apple's going to introduce a new iMac. And it's like, okay, well, I'll wait for WWDC and I'll wait for that announcement. I'll see what they have to say. Watch that announcement. There's no iMac introduction. So now I'm just kind of hanging out here going, what's going on? When's this new iMac coming? Not wanting to buy a current iMac because a new one's coming at some point. But, after the announcement of switching to Apple Silicon, not really sure I want to buy a new iMac either, because it's going to be an Intel-based iMac, probably. And even though Apple will support it for, probably 5 to 8 years or whatever, it still makes me kind of unsure about that, So I'm thinking to myself, I don't know, maybe my best bet is really just to fall back on building that editing PC like I thought about doing. It's not like PCs are out of my realm of experience. I've actually been a PC user longer than a Mac user. I started using PCs back in the early 90s when my dad brought home a 386 Packard Bell. And then I built my first PC myself in 1998, running an AMD K62 with a 4 gigabyte hard drive and 64 megabytes of RAM, and I think it was Windows 98 at the time. And the crown jewel of that machine was my $200 Creative DVD-ROM that I got for it. And that was actually my first DVD player as well. So that was back in 98, and I had a PC at home on my desk for like the next 10 years, and that I would just keep upgrading over the years until 2010, when I rebuilt that machine into a little bit more of a powerful machine. And my girlfriend had a MacBook that she had bought for college, and she wasn't really using it, and she wanted a PC, and I kind of wanted the MacBook, and so we switched. And at that point, that was 2010, I've been on a Mac constantly ever since. I had dabbled, I owned a couple of MacBooks, white MacBooks in the 2000s at a certain point for maybe a year or two, but not very long. As well as like Indigo G3 Mac Mini for, again, not very long. So I kind of dabbled in Macs in the aughts, but I wasn't consistently on one. And now, at 2010, not having a PC to fall back on, I went Mac full time for the next 10 years, even today, except at work. At my day job, I was still running a PC. And I had started editing on Premiere Pro sometime around 2009, 2010, I think, at work. And so for up until a couple of years ago, I've been running a PC as my work machine, running Premiere Pro. So it's not a foreign thing to me to run Premiere Pro on a PC. And which is why back in 2017, when I was still at that job, I was considering, I went out to bought that Lenovo and was considering even building a PC desktop at the time as well. So, really this is just kind of like me coming back full circle to that again and thinking to myself, well, maybe now I will. And I've been mulling it over for a month or so now, and I'm thinking I probably should pull the trigger. She thinks I should pull the trigger. I just haven't yet, because again, I've been just kind of mulling over my different options, thinking about Mac, waiting to see what Apple was going to release, and now, to be honest, the whole thing with the Apple Silicon thing, it feels like it's even more of a push to go and build a PC now, because I think that the Intel side of things with Windows is going to remain a little more viable for longer. Even if Apple supports their Intel machines for the next 5 or 8 years, I think that there's still a lot more support to come on the Windows Intel side for a lot longer, because there's just so many more Intel/Windows Wintel machines out there for business users and home users and so on, that I think that even if Windows does kind of decide to do the whole ARM thing again, go to that architecture, I think that for a lot longer they'll be supporting the Intel architecture, probably even a lot longer than Apple does. So I think it's probably a safer bet on the Windows side of things to build a Windows machine and feel like you're a little more secure in your investment right now than to go out and buy an Intel Mac at the moment. And another thing I've been considering is actually taking this 2012 Mac Mini and switching it over to Windows 10 as well, like boot camping it into Windows 10, because it runs fine right now, and it's a good machine, and I have no issues with Mojave, which I'm running on it. Although I am kind of interested in running Mac OS 11, but it turns out I can't run Mac OS 11 on this machine. Apple's not going to allow it. They cut it off, and only Mac Minis from 2014 onwards. So it just means that I've got one more Mac in the house that's suddenly no longer compatible with the newest OS. In fact, I've only got one Mac in the house now that's compatible with Mac OS 11, and that's my MacBook Pro. So this one in my late 2008, and certainly the old G3 isn't Mac OS 11 compatible. So but I could run Windows 10 on probably all of them. Well, maybe not all of them. Maybe not the 2008 one. Certainly not the G3 one. But I could definitely run Windows 10 on this one, and maybe even on my MacBook Pro. So, if I'm going to build a Windows Tower as my editing machine, I'm probably going to want to share hard drives between that and all the hard drives that are currently formatted for Mac down here that I'm using for my file server. So it might be a good plan to just make that transition with this machine as well, boot camp it into Windows 10, transition those hard drives over, and then I can switch them back and forth between the Windows 10 on the Mac Mini and the Windows 10 on the bigger tower that I'm thinking about building here. And then maybe even in time, start boot camping more into Windows 10 on my MacBook Pro. Although I'm sure some people are probably, grasping their pearls at that statement. But, it's an idea. Although I think I'll continue to run Mac OS for a while, for plenty of years to come, because I do have these Mac machines, and I do like Mac OS, and I think Mac OS 11 looks really interesting. But it's something to consider. I'm not somebody who boot camps right now, but it's something I think it's something that might maybe even provide a little more life for my Mac Mini. And if I build a Windows machine too, like I said, sharing hard drives and stuff and having them all formatted for NTFS, that's something that would be beneficial if it's all running on the same OS, and it's enough, the hard drives are all formatted the same. That'll make things work a little easier together. Again, still mulling it over, but just this Apple announcement, I think it's cool. I think it's cool that they're going to start running their own silicon, all that, but we're in this weird transition period now, and it makes it a little uneasy for Mac users like myself. And we're in this transition period with a lot of platforms. It's true with cameras as well. Canon, Nikon, Panasonic, all these guys switching over to their new mirrorless lens mounts. It's this weird time right now where it's like, well, it still feels almost too early to buy into the new stuff, because there isn't the deals and the variety available in the new side of things. At the same time, it's kind of hard to invest in the old stuff too, because the support isn't going to be there for a whole lot longer. So we're in this transition period right now with a lot of platforms, from cameras to computers, and especially with everything else going on in the world right now, it's a very shaky ground. So it's very hard to know where to put your money. and what's going to be the good solid investment when it comes to what you need and what's going to be usable and what's going to be still usable 5 years from now, because I'm not one of these guys that upgrades my stuff every year or every 6 months or every 2 years. I tend to go use a system for 5 years or so, and then I'll upgrade. So I'm looking for a 5-year investment here. And even if I did buy a brand new Intel Mac today, I'm sure I would get a good solid 5 years out of that machine, probably even longer. But again, kind of skittish with this whole move, because I know Apple's going to put a lot of their focus on the new Apple Silicon Macs going forward, and who knows what kind of support the Intel Macs are going to get. They may get basic OS support, but are they going to get all the features that the OS provides? Is the new software going to run on that? Are you going to miss out on certain things? It's hard to tell, and it makes for shaky ground, and it's not something I necessarily want to gamble with. As it stands right now, my MacBook Pro is, it feels like I just got it, but it's already 3 years old, and we'll see how much longer that one holds out with the new OS updates going forward. Obviously this Mac Mini is, it's stuck where it's at now. It can go to Catalina, but that's about it. So we'll see. But if you see a video from me in the future about a new PC build, now you know why. Because I decided, hey, to pull the trigger and build a new editing PC and start to make the transition, at least in some way, back to Windows. Although I'll probably be dual system at that point, at least for a while. But at least when it comes to my main editing machine and probably my file server and so on, it'll be on Windows again. So now that'll make sense if you see that video in the future. I can't guarantee you'll see that video. I'm still thinking it through. I'm still going over it. It takes me a while to make these decisions, but that's kind of where I'm leaning right now. It's kind of what's seeming like the right choice to make at this point in time. Although it's a bit of coin to put out, but still, it's seeming like the right choice.